Hi there, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, what does it take to lead one of the world's largest conservation organisations through a time when 41% of the UK species are in decline? And how can today's conservation leaders inspire millions to fight for biodiversity? Well, today's guest is Beccy Speight, who's the CEO of the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and she offers her insights into what it takes to manage over 1.2 million members and 200 reserves across the UK. In this episode, we discuss the RSPB's mission, the role of effective leadership, and Beccy's own career path from local government to conservation leadership. Beccy shares her biggest challenges that she faces, her hopes for the RSPB over the next decade, and what advice she'd give to anyone looking to enter the conservation sector. It's an inspiring, insightful, and mission-driven podcast. Enjoy.
Yeah, so I'm Beccy Speight and I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the RSPB.
Wonderful, and really nice to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us today, Beccy.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, it's funny. I was just saying just before the recording, actually, this feels like full circle because I spoke to the previous Chief Executive, Mike Clark, 5-6 years ago now. So it's wonderful to be kind of catching up with you now. You're 5 years into the role and hearing about how things are going and where you're taking things as well. For people who haven't heard of the RSPB, of which there probably aren't many, but let's start from that perspective anyway. Can you just give us a little bit of an idea of, who or what is the RSPB? Describe it for those that haven't heard of you.
Yeah, sure. So the RSPB is a charity, and it's quite an old charity. So it's been going for about 130 odd years. And it was set up in the UK in that sort of surge of kind of Victorian activity that went on at that period. So it was when things like the National Trust were also established around about then. And the RSPCA, for example, Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Yeah. So it's kind of that ilk, and it's quite big. So it has about 1.2 million members, and we own or manage about 160,000 hectares of land in the UK. So that's in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. Mm-hmm. But we also work internationally as well. So we also work on some of the UK overseas territories. So that's places like, for example, the Falkland Islands. Mm-hmm. And we also do work beyond those boundaries as well. So in some really important international kind of key biodiversity areas. So places like Sumatra in Indonesia, Gola in Sierra Leone. So, our footprint kind of extends internationally as well. But the bulk of our work is in the UK, and our kind of income is around about £150 million a year, most of which is spent every year delivering our work. Mm-hmm. We employ about just over 2,000 people, and we have around about 12,000 volunteers as well. So volunteers are a really kind of key part of our overall workforce. And I think it's fair to say that we try and do a number of things, but all of those add up to trying to create a world where people and wildlife can thrive, alongside one another, which is certainly not the case at the moment. We've just had COP16, the big kind of global biodiversity gathering, and it's so clear that we've got this huge crisis on our hands in terms of what's happening to our wildlife and our biodiversity. So we are definitely one of those organisations. There are a number of us who are trying to create a better world for wildlife and for people in the future.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Yeah. You're a huge voice for nature, 1.2 million members, like you said, huge UK and international impacts as well. When you think about some of the initiatives that the RSPB are involved in, and in the context of just painting a picture of the organisation more broadly, like what stands out for you particularly, Beccy? I'm not asking you to kind of choose your favourite child, but like what particular initiatives really kind of helped kind of bring you to life?
Yeah, I'll give you a sort of sense of some of the stuff we're involved in, I suppose. That will give you a probably the best sense possible. So, clearly we have a nature reserve network across the UK, and that really ranges from, some quite small sites, which might be all about a particular species. So we will be perhaps creating a habitat for a species that's right on the brink. and trying to kind of enable that species to at least thrive somewhere, so that if at some point the rest of the land around it becomes more conducive to wildlife thriving, then there's a kind of an arc population
Yeah.
from which that kind of, that restoration can happen. But some of our sites will be really big, and that's more about kind of large scale restoration, what's been called rewilding, but working with natural processes, allowing those back into a piece of land, for example. So, somewhere like Cairngorms Connect is a big project up in Scotland, where ourselves and 3 other major landowners work together on a huge scale and over a kind of 200-year timeline for our vision of kind of restoration of that landscape. So we're kind of at both ends of the spectrum. I think kind of, our policy work is also something I would highlight. So really trying, so I've been particularly busy, obviously, with a new UK government coming in Westminster over the last few months. So really trying to kind of influence the policy that we need in place from governments, both nationally, domestically and internationally, to make sure that we have the right kind of frameworks in place to get the systemic change that we know we need in things like our food system, for example. So not just the thing I love about RSPB, and I know I'm biased, is that we're doing it on the ground, so we know what it needs to kind of create somewhere where a particular species can thrive. We're doing that kind of large scale restoration, whereby we're kind of allowing natural processes to really kind of take charge again. And then we're also trying to influence the sort of frameworks that sit around that. So the policy and the government decisions that need to be made to enable all of that to happen. So we work kind of right across that spectrum. And the other thing, of course, I would highlight is our work in trying to engage people, because, we would be very strongly of the belief that you can't possibly expect to kind of turn around that biodiversity crisis we're in without, enough people wanting that to happen and being prepared to take action for that to happen. So we do a lot of work on trying to engage our own members, but also beyond that as well. Something we've been doing just recently is setting up a really successful TikTok account, which has been about trying to really engage younger people around, what's going on. We have a really successful thing called Bird of the Week, which is just really getting people excited about birds in a way that kind of makes sense for them. So, that's really important for what we do as well. So it's that breadth, I think, that I love, and that I think makes the RSPB such a powerful kind of force for nature, is that we're kind of playing right across that whole field.
Yeah, wonderful. Also, I'm just thinking out loud myself, like there's a big garden bird watch is something that we are involved in at my end. There's the big schools bird watch soon, which is really interesting about engaging younger people. So yeah, loads going on.
That's really important citizen science. So it's a great way of engaging people, but it's also a great way of kind of gathering broad and shallow, but data around some of our most common birds, and what they're up to in terms of the UK in particular. But of course, we have a big science team. So we have a team of around about 50, 60 staff who are all kind of scientists working on kind of finding what we would, what I call applied science solutions. So they're very good at going out and investigating and finding the evidence and the kind of solutions that we need to some of these problems we're facing into. So that science approach does very much underpin the work we do, particularly on our reserves.
Wonderful. You've been enrolled now about 5 years. I think you joined in 2019. We're recording in 2024. Why did you apply for the job? And how did you feel when you got it?
So I applied. I think I've been on a bit of a trajectory of my own, really. And I started working in the charity sector in 2000, when I worked for the National Trust. That was my kind of first toe dip into the kind of charity sector. And I really loved that. And I went on to then work as the chief executive for the Woodland Trust, and now here. And I think that trajectory has been all about getting to where I think the kind of the big battle is, which is around the natural world. I think you can debate at length whether the kind of our kind of built heritage is in a good state or a bad state. but the urgency of the situation for me is around the natural world, and with it, as part of that, the climate crisis as well. So that's
Mm.
I wanted to be somewhere where I felt my efforts were going to make most difference to that. And I think that is what brought me to the RSPB, because again, it's that breadth thing. I think it's
Mm.
because of what the RSPB works on, I feel like that is going to be kind of where I can make most difference. So that's what brought me to the RSPB, really. And what was your second question? How did I feel when I got the job?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really excited, but also slightly terrified. I mean, it's a big old agenda, and it's a kind, in a way, it's a sort of, and I think this is true of a lot of purpose-driven organisations. Some of which are charities. It doesn't have to be a charity, but when you're working for a purpose-driven organisation, often your purpose is quite infinite,
Mm.
or quite
Mm.
infinite in nature. So, trying to kind of, stem the biodiversity crisis, trying to make the world better for birds, it's quite a kind of infinite agenda. So I think, just working out how you're going to lead in that sort of context, it's
Mm.
quite a scary thing, actually. And also, that you're probably going to have a workforce that's really passionate about the cause. So
Mm.
not everybody who works for the RSPB is, nuts about birds and nuts about nature, but most of us are. And I think, that's also a great kind of, it's a great privilege to lead an organisation like that, but it's also, a great kind of, task as well. So it felt like it was going to be a real task of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that word, actually, task, I'm quite interested. Not many people get to be a chief executive of an organization the scale of the RSPB.
Yeah.
Um, how do you see your role? Like, what is your role or your responsibilities as chief executive?
Yeah, I know that's a really interesting question. It's an obvious question, but it's a really interesting one because I think, and it's something I get asked quite a lot. Well, what is it that you actually do? And I say, oh, I sit with my feet up. I think, it. So for me, there's definitely, an inward facing role and an outward facing role, and those are both important. So I think, the outward facing role is all about kind of the RSPB's cause, whether that cause is being delivered or not, whether working with our trustees, who ultimately are responsible for the organisation, whether we are making the right relationships, whether those relationships are in a good place, etc., etc. So there's all of that kind of outward facing stuff I think is really important to the role of CEO, and you've got to be comfortable with that. I think it is an essential part of the role. It's not a kind of a, if you quite like it or if you feel like it. It's, you've got to do that job of work. And then I think the internally facing role is all about kind of leading people ultimately. It's
Mm.
about making sure that, people who work for the organization, understand what it's trying to do, understand where it's going, understand the part they play in that. You're basically trying to galvanize the utmost from a body of people for a cause. That's what you're trying to do.
Mm.
And both those things are equally important, I think.
Mm. I asked my 9-year-old what he'd like to ask you in your job, and I thought his
Sure.
question was quite interesting, and it connects to younger people, I guess. What do you think is special about your role, and why?
Um, I mean, I think for me, what is special about my role is part of that kind of purpose-driven thing that I talked about. I feel lucky enough that I am trying to, lead a group of very committed people to do what I think is one of the most important things facing humanity today, which is to kind of resolve the biodiversity crisis and get ourselves into a better place around it. And that feels enormously important to me. So I think what's special about my role is that I'm lucky enough to be in a place where I feel like I can contribute to something I really, really believe in and contribute kind of my utmost to it. And what do I like about it? I mean, the thing I really like about it is the variety. So, the fact that A, purpose is really important to me, but B, the variety of stuff I get kind of, involved in or coming across my desk or I get to go out and see as part of that role is kind of what I love about it. Yeah.
Connected to that, then, what's a typical day like for you, or is there a typical day or a week? Like, what
There,
is it like?
I mean, there isn't really a typical day, but the kind. I mean, I might be trying to sort of, for example, I might be going out to see something happening on one of our reserves, and perhaps kind of, contribute some thinking towards that, or celebrate a success, or wrestle with a problem. So there's this sort of on the ground stuff, but then I might also be trying to resolve, funding for some of our international work, for example, or I might be doing an interview, a media interview about what we're doing, or I might be kind of engaging with politicians, around a particular change we want to see in policy or a particular issue we want to see tackled. So it really is very varied, and it involves quite a lot of travel from time to time. It's you don't sort of wake up and have a typical day, I suppose, which suits me. For some people that would be a nightmare, but it really suits me, that kind of slightly butterfly like from one thing to the next, and that's just probably in a day. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I can see the variety kind of coming through and the passion and energy coming from you as well in that. I want to talk a little bit more about your career journey. You sort of
Yeah.
touched it already. Yeah, so I'm going to read a bit out here that I've got for you. So your career path has taken you from local government in Scotland to management consulting. You then worked in the conservation charity sector from around 2000 onwards with the National Trust as a regional director in the East Midlands, and also the Woodland Trust as chief exec. I'm really interested in the kind of management consulting piece in that
Yeah.
kind of chain. Yeah, what did you learn in management consulting
Yeah.
that you're kind of folding into your work now? Because I feel there are links in there, but yeah, I'd love to hear what they
Yeah,
are.
there are. I mean, and the further away from it I get, the more I can see the link, which is always
Ah,
interesting, isn't it? When you look back, kind of a bit, because I always think, oh, my career's been really eclectic and kind of there's no rhyme or reason to it. But actually, when you look back, you can see some rhyme or reason. And I think, I mean, management consulting, I really enjoyed. I loved working with a lot of kind of bright people, really bright people,
mm,
and you would often be kind of thrown into quite a challenging situation. So there would be a big merger or acquisition going on, or some kind of really tricky kind of strategic issues to negotiate through in a business,
mhm.
and you would sort of get plunged into that as the sort of paid brain to try and help an organization kind of navigate its way through something like that. And I think that sort of being able to kind of just quickly ascertain what's going on and kind of see where contributions can be made to resolve that. That's
Mm,
definitely a skill I picked up from management consultancy, and which I've used, in my work ever since, really.
mm,
And I think the other thing that you really get from management consultancy is sort of the whole kind of urgency thing, because you're kind of, you're basically paid. I mean, I can remember, I mean, I was much younger then, but I can remember having to pull all-nighters to kind of, get a particular deal, through for a big merger or something like that. And you get used to kind of being in an urgent situation, and the energy that you need to bring to that, and the energy that can be brought to that when needs must. So I think that sense of how you galvanize a team or galvanize the resolution to a particular issue, I definitely got that from management consulting as well.
yeah.
And I think also I was lucky enough. It was quite a small consultancy, and it was kind of growing quite fast while I was there. Actually, after I left, it got swallowed up by a much bigger organization, but it was a founder-led company that was kind of learning how to do all of this stuff, how to run itself as an organization as it grew.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting as well. And I think I picked up a lot from that, actually, about how you do and how you don't do that successfully.
Yeah.
So I definitely learned from that too. So the more although I kind of, when I left management consultancy, it was not sort of moving away from all of that. It was more wanting to move towards something where I felt its purpose really aligned with my own.
Yeah.
But I think I took a lot from that experience that I've applied ever since, really.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? You said at the beginning there about how careers can often feel, I'm paraphrasing, like quite wiggly.
Mm,
When you look back, there are links or stepping off points, key
yeah,
moments. Yeah.
yeah.
Have there been any particular key moments that stand out for you in terms of projects, people, roles that you think have really helped to get you to where you are today?
I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people, I think luck comes into it, always,
Mm,
always, always. And people who are willing to take a bit of a punt on you and who kind of see something in you. I think particularly if you're going to make some of those shifts that I've made from sector to sector,
Mm.
somebody in the news sector has to kind of look at you a kind of a bit of an odd creature and say something in there that's kind of good enough that I think it's worth taking a punt. And I think I always feel, and I think mentoring is the other thing. So when I first worked in local government, I was really fortunate in having a very good kind of informal mentor, really, just another woman an old woman who worked in this same kind of unit I was working in, and who was, who kind of held my hand through some of the kind of early stuff when you're kind of in your early career.
Mm.
And then I've had kind of other sort of more formal mentors, and they've all definitely helped. I think when I shifted from management consultancy to go and work for the National Trust, I took a very big kind of salary drop. I just looked like a really odd candidate.
Mm.
And I'll be forever grateful to the guy who kind of thought, well, she all seems a bit odd, but she's got enough that I can see her kind of being able to thrive. And I think it's a great privilege, I think, as you move through your career to be able to kind of spot people who might be like you were, and just kind of and almost kind of reach in and say, I think this person is worth us kind of investing in the broadest sense of the word, because I think they can bring something. And I think I will always be grateful that happened when I shifted into the National Trust.
Mm.
And then again, I think moving into my first CEO role, which was at the Woodland Trust, again, somebody needed to say, she's led some other stuff. It's been inside organisations, but we think she could lead an organisation. You sort of need that kind of you need that vote of confidence, I think. And that's always helpful for anybody in any situation, but I think it's particularly helpful when you're trying to kind of move into something that might be more challenging.
Yeah. And precisely on that point, actually, of confidence, we speak to, probably even in the audience today, we have career switchers,
Yeah, yeah,
people who are working outside the conservation movement who would
yes,
dearly love to work in the conservation movement and often
yeah,
feeling a lack of confidence, actually, and an imposter syndrome, sort of
yeah,
being
yeah.
outside looking in. How do you view, yeah, the roles or opportunities for career switchers to kind of come in and help shape the movement? Are there opportunities for people? Can they help? Are there skills needed? Speak to that
Yeah.
as you wish, really. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there are a number of ways into that. I mean, one is obviously what I would call a kind of a purist move, where you maybe decide that your kind of career to date has not been what you're most passionate about, and you're going to go off and you're going to do a qualification in kind of conservation skills in some shape or form, or something science based to get you into conservation, etc., etc. And that's quite a kind of a purist move where you're kind of just literally kind of stepping from one thing and hoping to step into the next. And I
The
think,
retraining, I guess, would
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
perfect.
yeah. And I think, sorry, you've got much better language around that. But I think, I think that kind of, I think that is really um, mainly about just kind of getting the bit of experience that you need in order to make that switch. So that's where,
Yeah.
I mean, that is where something like volunteering, which is a kind of a classic kind of conservation route, does come into it, because if you can demonstrate kind of, commitment and having built up some practical experience, etc., etc., you're more likely to make that switch successfully, annoying as it is. And that's one way in. I think the other is to kind of take what you do now and the skills you have now and just apply them in a conservation setting.
Mm.
And that's where, again, and often that will be a bigger conservation organization, but you can take your comms and PR training, or your kind of your accountancy training, or whatever it is, and just apply it in that context. And that's a kind of another route that I see a lot of people taking. And the third, which I guess is my route really, is to be a generalist, and to just be what I would call a good generalist, which is kind of what I am really. I'm not an expert in conservation, but I've built up that kind of general knowledge around lots of different aspects of kind of, yes, conservation, but also kind of running a big organization. And
Mm.
I think, particularly, again, larger conservation bodies are often hungry for that kind of generalist experience to come in. They have a lot of people who come up that kind of slightly narrower route, which is equally valid, but they also want to sprinkle that in with some kind of good generalists who have that experience in other sectors and in kind of wider roles, and bring that in. So that's the route I've taken, I suppose. So I think there's a route for everybody actually, but you
Yeah.
just have to decide which one you're doing and then kind of pursue the right tactics that kind of take you up that path.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. And also in the same context, like for young people who are really passionate about conservation, they might be at school or
Yeah.
university, yeah, what advice would you give for people in the kind of younger age spectrum who are looking to kind of become wildlife conservationists? Is there anything additional or different for them to think about as well?
Um, well, again, I think, and I'm going to sound really old nowadays. I think there are kind of there's probably a wider choice of qualification you can do. So I would always encourage, if you can manage it and if you can afford it, to do a qualification of some sort to kind of give you some of that kind of knowledge. I would always encourage, volunteering of some sort if you can, to build your practical experience. And I think, make yourself into that kind of package of both kind of technical ability, but also kind of practical experience. And I would always try and combine those two things, because I think that's what conservation organisations really cry out for.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is I mean, personally, I think the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis are both enormous things, right, that we're facing into. And you don't have to work in a conservation organisation in order to kind of play your part in addressing those. So, I think you can work in many different organizations and yet be a voice for, for example, business taking kind of its impact on nature seriously. You can be a voice for that within an organization doing whatever job you're doing for that organization.
Yeah.
So I don't think you necessarily need to become a conservationist in order to address the biodiversity crisis. So I think there are lots of different things that young people can think about doing as part of that. One thing I do think is that certainly when I see young people coming into the RSPB, I think what's really interesting for me, again, as someone who's older, is that I can see that they are very purpose driven. So they're very interested in a purposeful job of work. And I think that's really interesting. And that brings quite a lot of young people into things like the conservation sector. But they're also much more interested in having a kind of a way of life that works for them.
Mm.
So I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting, and that's a real shift, generational shift, I think. And I think working in conservation is one of those areas that can offer both those things. It can offer you a really kind of purposeful way of spending the hours in your day, but at the same time, it can also offer you a way of life that might be what you're looking for as well. So I think that's quite interesting, and I think for me that because let's face it, certainly the pay is not what you're coming for. The pay is okay, but it's not going to kind of be amazing.
Yeah.
But I think you can come for those things and have a really fulfilling kind of career in conservation.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing there is about respecting boundaries as well between work and life and having that kind of that work-life balance that I think many of us are looking for. Yeah.
Yeah,
Work is
yeah,
the purpose, but you can kind of still maintain the sanity in the life around it that maybe other
yes,
sectors might draw more into. Yeah, but that's for
yes,
you to
yeah.
maintain that boundary, isn't it? Because purpose can expand into your private life
It
ad
really can.
infinitum. Yeah.
It really can. And I also have lots of people who I work with who would spend all day working for the RSPB and then go off counting birds in the evening. I mean, inevitably that is the case. But I think kind of being able to um, work somewhere that respects that,
Yeah.
and sees that as a really positive thing is also kind of quite rewarding for people too.
Yeah. And that comes from the top. Yeah. Yeah. We've got about 10, 15 minutes left. I'm going to try and save some time for our audience who are
Hmm.
listening to ask their own questions after our recording. So I'm just going to ask some wider, more open questions of you.
Yeah.
Quick one is really simple, but can be a bit tricky as well. If I could take you to one place on Earth and you could see one species, where would we take you and what would you want to look at?
Oh wow. I can't tell you one.
You
I
can pick a
mean,
few if you want, but
I I've always, I would love, Costa Rica is absolutely on my kind of, list of somewhere I'd love to go, just because of the intensity of the wildlife experience you get that, so much of it to see. I would love to go actually up to Alaska, and see kind of the bears. That would just be amazing. I think I'd love to go and see lynx. There's all sorts of things I would love to see, but to be honest with you, equally rewarding to me is, I spent, where was I on Saturday? I was up in Cumbria, and going for a walk up one of those beautiful valleys, and just seeing, there was a hunting barn owl. It was dusky, and there was a hunting barn owl alongside us for about half an hour. It was fantastic views.
Yeah.
And that was equally rewarding. So I think for me, it's just about being in an environment that feels like it's nature rich, and then getting to experience a species in that environment, and getting to experience it sort of close enough to you that you can kind of see its otherness, but also have it quite close by. And I think that is what I love doing. So anywhere you could take me anywhere in the world, if I could do that, I'd be happy.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Barn owls are really close to my heart as well. I studied them for 5 years, and they're the most widely distributed species of bird on the planet. So you'd see
Yeah,
them wherever you went, probably. So,
yeah.
like,
They're so um distinctive and
yeah,
beautiful to watch.
yeah,
It
yeah,
never ceases me to believe. It always feels like a real privilege when you see a barn owl, I think.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think they have a human face as well. There are a
Yes.
few birds that look human in a way.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
really
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting to connect with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to tell you this story, Nick.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who lives on a farm up in the Pennines, and they they worked really hard to put up a barn owl box,
Yeah.
and in one of their barns, and just as they
Yeah.
were putting it up, they realised there was already a barn owl nesting. And she just sent me this fantastic footage of the chicks fledging. It was just really brilliant. It was lovely. Yeah, yeah. So I think that thing about they're very other, because they have that very other look to them, but
Yeah.
they live quite close to us. It's just
Mm,
an amazing privilege, isn't it? Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Um, I'm making the most of the time, so forgive me for going quite fast. Yeah, I've been reading around the RSPB, we talk
Yeah.
about 41% of UK species have been in decline since the 1970s, which is really
Yeah.
stark, quite sharp declines. There's two questions linked to that. I'll go one at a time. Yeah, how do you and do you manage to stay positive, when faced with some of these huge challenges? Because it is a real source for concern for so many of us, but
Yeah.
maintaining motivation, maintaining positivity is a challenge. But do you achieve that, or if so, how?
We all have our moments, don't we?
Mm,
When you
yeah,
think, oh, that kind of Living Planet survey coming out just recently saying, it's 73% over the last 50 years. That's my lifetime. And you just think,
yeah,
oh. But I think two things. One is, it's probably more than two actually. One is
mm,
that sort of framing that people like Christiana Rodriguez give to the climate crisis, which is kind of outrage and optimism. So
mm,
you can be utterly outraged and
mm,
horrified by what is happening. That is allowed, and you can be upset by it and angry about it. But you have to stay optimistic in terms of taking action to try and address it. So you have to try and hold both those things at once, and that's quite challenging sometimes, but I think you can do it, and I think that's really important in terms of not just giving up. We have to keep driving forward to try and kind of make this world as best as we can,
mm,
given what we're facing into, and that's going to be true about adaptation to the climate crisis. It's going to be true about trying to kind of restore some of our natural world, particularly here in the UK, where it's we are very kind of yeah, depleted in biodiversity terms, but we know what we would need to do in order to turn that around. And actually, that is a really positive thing: is that we know what we need to do. We just need to do more of it.
yeah,
We need to do it at scale, and we need to do it urgently. So
yeah,
so that I think I find that incredibly kind of positive, that we do know what we need to do. I think the other thing is, I read something recently, which is there are different ways to live in a tragedy. And we are undoubtedly, right now, looking at the biodiversity crisis, it is a blinking tragedy, what's going on.
yeah,
But we can choose how we live in that tragedy and what we do to try and kind of do something to address it.
Mm.
So I think that is choosing your attitude is and doing that quite deliberatively is
Yeah.
really important. And the last thing I would say is I think doing something either in your work or in your personal life
Yeah.
that feels like you are taking action to address it can really, really help. So if you're lucky enough to have a garden,
Yeah.
make your garden wilder. If you're lucky enough to kind of be part of a community group, do something in your community group. I think, if you want to go on a march, go on a march. I think there are things you can do that will make you personally feel better about it. And I think, finally, the last thing I say is I still find it enormously uplifting just to be out in nature. I mean, just like that experience of the barn owl that I was telling you about. That's enormously uplifting. Yes, I can stand there and look around me and think, oh, this landscape is not great for nature. There's, it should be more like this and should be more like that. But ultimately, I get to spend that time with a barn owl, and I find that kind of enormously restorative, I suppose, when I'm feeling kind of particularly depleted. So I think there are numerous ways in which you can address it. But I think what it demands of us is that we are deliberative about it. We don't just kind of become passive and just kind of groan and let it all happen.
Yeah. Loads of positive steps in that. I love that. And I hadn't thought about holding those two separate ideas in your mind at once. And that's quite a
Yeah,
useful thing to do, actually, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's okay to be upset. It's
yeah,
okay to be
yeah,
angry about this, but at the
yeah.
same time, we can be calm, we can be considered, we can be
Yeah,
productive.
to be honest with you, if you're not feeling really sad and angry about what's going on in the natural world, there's something wrong with you. You should be feeling like that.
Yeah, wonderful. And the other thing as well, briefly, that I heard as I was listening was, yeah, what I took was like like the label conservationist doesn't mean you have to be paid to do it. If you're doing some good in your garden,
Yeah,
you're doing a rally, whatever it might be, the smallest activity, you can proudly call yourself a conservationist. You're making a difference.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I talk about become a member of an organisation as well. It doesn't have to be RSPB. It can be,
yeah,
Wildlife Trust. It can be, National Trust, whatever you choose. But
yeah,
be part of something bigger, because that
yeah,
way, your efforts, your money, your kind of voice adds up to something bigger, and that's what we need now. Scale is so important in what we've got to do. So I would really encourage that as well.
yeah. Which links perfectly to my next question. Actually, was again relating to declines and the scale of the challenge that we're facing. What does the conservation movement need to do more of or be better at to really move this needle? Like almost like why haven't we done it so far? Is another way of asking the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the conservation movement, you have to always look at where it came from.
Yeah.
So it came from often, a bunch of individuals who were passionate about a particular thing. So,
Mm,
in the RSPB, it was, three women who were really upset about how
mm,
birds around the world were kind of at the risk of going extinct
mm.
because of a fashion for
Yeah.
having big feathers in your hats,
Yeah.
and they decided to do something about it. So the conservation movement has passionate roots that are all quite sort of separate. It might be butterflies, it might be birds, it might be. So I think allow that, and that is what has often kind of driven kind of these big membership movements as well. But without a doubt, we can achieve more when we work together.
Mm,
And so that's what I kind of really look for is, can we join up more around the policy agenda, which
mhm,
we are getting much better at joining up around. If you look at something like the Restore Nature Now March, for example, or some of the kind of big shifts we've seen around, say, for example, agricultural policy, we've got better at joining up around that stuff in policy terms. And then you can join up as well in terms of kind of delivery on the ground. So, where I said that scale really matters. So kind of bringing together land owned by one organisation that might be contiguous with land owned by another organisation, you can create a much better outcome for nature by doing that. And I think the thing that I think we've never quite cracked is, could we join up more in terms of kind of what I would call back office services? So things like, how we do how we all run our payrolls, how we all run our kind of, various kind of processes that every big organization needs. I think that's that. And kind of we never find the time to do that because we're all so busy out there delivering for the cause. But I think that's an ask. I mean, I always say that, if this was a business sector, you would be looking at it and you'd say this is ripe for mergers and acquisitions. There's kind of too many organizations
yeah.
all trying to do fairly similar things. But I think there are lots of reasons why that hasn't happened before, and you can find that in its roots. But I think for sure, because of the scale of the crisis and the way in which we understand it now. Not just joining up in the sector, but joining up with kind of academic institutions about some of the science that underlies some of this, joining up with really good comms organizations to really make sure that we kind of deliver the message effectively. All of that. I'm kind of one of the things when I took on this role in the RSPB, I sort of set 6 shifts that I really wanted to see the organization make while I was leading it. And one of them was absolutely about kind of, bigger, better collaboration in order to deliver all of that. So, I think there are reasons why it hasn't happened. I think there are good reasons why more of it should happen. But I think a lot of it can be achieved just by kind of being more aligned and more kind of, again, deliberatively aligned when we need to be. We had great success with the Save Our Wild Isles campaign, for example, when it was ourselves. It was WWF, and it was the National Trust post the programmes going out, and that definitely had cut through, I think, because of the scale of what we were able to do on the back of that. So we need to keep working at it.
Yeah, here's to all that. Wonderful. Final question, if I can, then. Where do you see the RSPB going in the next, let's say, 5-10 years? Have you got a vision? What other things do you want to see kind of play out?
So I want the organisation to be making the contribution I think it should be making as the largest kind of, nature conservation charity in Europe. I think I want to see it really kind of realising that contribution. And I kind of set up those shifts that I talked about to try and set out what I thought that looked like. And it does look like kind of more collaboration. It does look like more large scale work. It does look like kind of more people supporting the cause and more diverse people supporting the cause. It looks like us being a louder campaigning voice, which I think we're definitely starting to be. It looks like us making sure that we feel really relevant to the world out there. I think there's always the kind of risk that conservation is kind of seen as a sort of a nice to have, or a kind of, if you're interested in birds type thing, and yet kind of, what's going on in terms of biodiversity decline. I mean, it's relevant for everybody. I mean, nature underpins our economy, it underpins the water we drink, the food we eat, so just making sure that relevance is kind of writ large feels really, really important to me. So I just want the RSPB to be making its utmost contribution to that, really. And that's tough work. And I feel like sometimes I ask a lot of the organisation, but if it's not going to be us, then who's it going to be? The time to do it is now, and we are in a good place to do that. So I just want to see us absolutely delivering on that.
Here's the next 5 years. That's wonderful. Beccy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. It's been lovely chatting to you. Yeah. And if people want to find out more particularly about the RSPB's work and maybe get involved, maybe join, maybe become a member, whatever it might be, where should they go? Where should we send them?
Go to our website. That's by far the easiest thing, and have a good look at that. And that will tell you many answers. And I would just, you can become a volunteer, you can become a member, you can become somebody who, takes action for nature. All of those things would be fantastic. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy, or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.